There is a lady by the name of Laurel Libby. Laurel Libby. She happens to be from Maine. I love Maine. Beautiful, beautiful state. She's in the state legislature. And by all accounts, Ms. Libby is a very talented, accomplished legislator. She has beliefs, as we all do. And one of her beliefs is that it is unfair to allow transgender women to play women's sports. In other words, Ms. Libby, I don't speak for her, but I've read her interviews. She believes it's unfair, fundamentally unfair, that it will destroy women's sports if transgender women, biological males who identify as transgender women, are allowed to play women's sports. And she has said so. In fact, she put up a Facebook post, and the Facebook post highlighted a transgender athlete who one year placed fifth, I think, in the pole vault, and then transitioned into, he placed fifth as a male athlete, but then transgendered or transformed into, or transitioned is what I'm trying to say, into a transgender woman and competed at the state level and came in first. She came in first. So when this individual was a biological male and competing, the biological male came in fifth in the state competition. The biological male transitioned into a transgender female and participated, was allowed to participate by the officials in Maine in the pole vault in women's sports and came in first. Well, Ms. Libby thought that was really unfair, and so she posted a picture of the athlete, the transgender athlete, when she was a biological male, and currently when she has now become a transgender. She posted the picture. She didn't put any name, any phone numbers, any addresses, or any of that. She posted the picture of the athlete side by side before transitioning after. And here's what she said: "We've learned that just 1 year ago, John, the transgender athlete, when she was a biological male, was competing in boys pole vault. That's when he had his fifth place finish." And then she went on to say, "So all of this transpired in the last year with the full blessing of the Maine Principals Association. 2 years ago," she wrote, "John tied for fifth place in boys pole vault. Tonight, John, now Katie, because John is transitioned into a transgender woman, tonight Katie won first place in the girls' Maine State Class B championship." And Ms. Libby thought that was unfair. And so do many Americans. So do I, frankly. Well, Ms. Libby's in the state legislature, and her colleagues, Democrats, who are entitled to their opinion as much as Ms. Libby, who's a Republican, is entitled to hers, they got very angry. They wanted to throw her out. They wanted to throw Ms. Libby out of the Maine legislature. They wanted to expel her, but they couldn't do it because that takes a 2/3 vote. So they said, "We're not going to expel her. We're going to censure her." That only takes a majority vote. But in censoring her, which they only needed Democratic votes to do, they added conditions that Ms. Libby could no longer vote and could no longer participate in any legislative committees. I guess she just has to sit there. Well, that disenfranchises the constituents that Ms. Libby represents. And frankly, they kind of went through the back door when they should have gone through the front door in a transparent way. I'm not here to try to meddle in the Maine state legislature. Let me say it again, I love Maine. I think it's one of the most beautiful places in the world. And the way they handle their local politics is none of my business. That's not why I'm here. But I am here to say what Ms. Libby did. Let me put it another way. Ms. Libby's belief about the fairness of transgender women participating in women's sports is based on science. It is. You may disagree with the science, and you may disagree with her, and if you do, you're entitled to do that. But Ms. Libby didn't just pluck this point of view out of thin air. A lot of Americans agree with her. I think most Americans think that, when you're 18 years of age, you're an adult, this is America, you can do anything you want to do, as long as it's not illegal or it doesn't hurt somebody else. You can be whomever you want to be. You can dress however you want to dress. You can't run around naked, but in terms of your dress, you can express yourself however you want if you're 18. And I think most Americans don't have a problem with that. So long as it's perfectly legal, I don't. But when you're under 18, you're a minor, adults get to make decisions because you're a minor. Duh. I also think that the American people have worked very hard through their elected representatives to try to lift up women's sports in America. We've worked very hard and spent a lot of y'all's money lifting up women's sports so that women can be treated equally with men. And I also think, through no one's fault, I started to say only through God's fault, but I'm not going to criticize God's decisions. Through nobody's fault. If you believe in God, it was a decision by God. If you just believe in nature, it was a decision by nature. Men and women are different. And men have a physical advantage over women. And if you allow a male, no matter how the male identifies, to compete with a woman in women's sports, particularly when you're under 18, the male's going to win every single time. That's not just speculation. That's not just common sense. That's science. The ACLU, which believes that transgender women, biological males who transition into transgender women, they say it's a fact that trans girls are girls. And the ACLU and other activists have also said that it's a myth. They call it a myth that transgender female athletes, like Katie, formerly John, they say it's a myth that transgender female athletes have a physical advantage over girls. They're wrong. This is wrong. You don't need a graduate degree in anatomy to know that. I mean, those claims are specious. Medical science and athletic data both demonstrate that the difference is obvious and that males, no matter how they identify, have a significant advantage over females in girls' sports. Even before birth, when the baby is in a mother's womb, this is a scientific fact, baby boys begin developing different hormones and skeletal structures than baby girls that help them outperform girls when they're older. That's just a fact. We can say we wish it weren't. I'm fine with it. Some people say, well, that's bad. Well, take it up with nature. Take it up with God. But it's a natural fact. When that baby's in the womb, testosterone exposure for that baby boy alters his brain development. That improves that baby boy's motor skills and increases that baby boy's aggression vis-a-vis a baby girl. Both motor skills and aggression give that baby boy, when that baby boy grows up, an advantage over a girl in women's sports. Boys, the science also shows, they go through what's called a mini puberty. Still a baby boy in the mother's womb. The baby boy experiences a mini puberty, is what the scientists call it, right before birth, that helps a baby boy, once that baby boy is born, to gain weight faster than if he were a baby girl. And that ultimately is why boys tend to be taller than girls once they're born, on average, later in life. Now, the differences between boys and girls, again, this is a law of nature, or a law of God, depending on what you believe. The differences between boys and girls explode during puberty. I mean, I've got a single child. He's a grown man now, but I remember puberty. I learned during puberty that reasoning, there's nothing wrong with teenagers, that reasoning with them will not aggravate. That's just also a law of nature, I think. But boys and girls, the differences between them explode during puberty. Boys develop 14% larger hearts when they go through puberty, and 12% larger lungs. So boy versus girl, the boy's heart is going to be 14% bigger and in lungs 12% larger. An obvious advantage in sports. That helps boys take in oxygen and pump blood more efficiently than girls can. That's just a fact. And that gives them a clear edge in endurance sports. Running, cycling, rowing, basketball. Girls also, during puberty and afterwards, develop a wider pelvis. This decreases the amount of force their legs exert when they're lifting, or when a girl is kicking, or a girl is pedaling, which also puts a girl, as an act of nature, at a relative disadvantage when you compare female athletes to male athletes. Boys, during puberty and after puberty on the other hand, they develop broader shoulders than girls. I think we know that. When they develop those broader shoulders, that makes space for upper body muscle mass. It is hard to think of a sport in which a higher muscle to fat ratio, and boys have a higher muscle to fat ratio. It is just a scientific fact. It's hard to think of a sport in which a higher muscle to fat ratio is not helpful. The average boy will also grow, again, scientific fact, 5 inches taller than the average girl. And even when men and women are the same height, men have higher levels of bone density, which helps them move more forcefully and escape more injuries. And that, I mean, you don't, again, boys just have a physical advantage over girls. And we see it in everyday life. Top ranked, well, let me put it another way. In 2016, there was an American sprinter. She was a great athlete, is a great athlete. Her name is Allison Felix. She won an Olympic gold medal in the women's 400-meter race. Ran a hell of a race. She came in first. A year later, 285 teenage boys in America beat her time. She was the best in her class, in the world, as a female. But 285 guys in high school beat her time. Don't take my word for it. That's a study that was done by Duke University. The year she won the gold medal, there were 4,300 male athletes in America who clocked faster times than 400 meters, and she did. I don't want to belabor this, but I think you can see why Ms. Libby feels that it is unfair to women, to allow biological males who had transitioned into a woman to compete in men's sports. It's not only unfair, it's dangerous. And again, I don't speak for Ms. Libby, but this is what I think she had on her mind when she exercised her First Amendment rights. I'll give you some examples. In May, a couple of years ago, a high school volleyball player in North Carolina, she's a female, she sued her state's high school athletics association. Why? Because they allowed a transgender player to play against her, and the transgender female, biological male, transgender female, spiked the ball in her face, gave her a concussion, long-term physical injuries, long-term mental injuries. Last October, a high school senior in California suffered a season-ending concussion after a transgender volleyball player spiked the ball, hit her in the face during the game, and it ended her final season of high school volleyball. Now, last February, a girls' basketball team in Massachusetts, they forfeited a game after a transgender athlete injured 3 female players in a single game. The biological male who had transitioned into a transgender woman was allowed to play in the basketball game and took 3 of the female players out. And so the rest of the team said, no mas. And the coach said, nope, I'm not going to let my players get hurt. They forfeited the game. I raised this, Madam President, not to denigrate anyone. I'm going to say it again. When you're an adult, in America, you can be whomever you want to be. And, about 90% of my personal philosophy is don't hurt someone unless you have to defend yourself. Don't take other people's stuff and leave me alone, because that's my right as an American. And I sort of feel that way about everybody. But we're not talking about freedom here. We're talking about nature. And we're talking about fairness in women's sports. And we're talking about women getting hurt. And that's why I think Ms. Libby is right. It's fundamentally unfair, because if for no other reason, acts of God or nature or whatever you want to call it, boys are different from girls when it comes to athletics. And there's nothing we can do about it. There's nothing I want to do about it, but some people do. Ms. Libby has sued in Maine and said that her constitutional rights are being violated. I think she's right. I'm not going to try to advise her judge how to rule. But I don't, so I can't say whether her constitutional rights are being violated or not. But I can tell you this: common sense and the laws of nature, or the laws of God, if you please, are certainly being violated, because female young women are fundamentally different from male young boys, and that's just a natural fact. Madam President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll. Ms. Alsterbrooks.